Welcome back to another episode of Sound Pal Stay at Home and Watch Movies. I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, guys.
And today we're going to be reviewing Tenet. And just fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. Armed with only one word, Tenet, and fighting for the survival of the entire world, a protagonist journeys through a twilight world of international espionage on a mission that will unfold into something beyond real time. So let's begin with my list of pros. First, the genre of this film is one of my favorite, time and paradoxes together. Plus, director Christopher Nolan isn't a stranger to this, with many films under his belt such as Memento, Inception, Interstellar, but this is his hardest movie to understand, or should I say grasp, the story for regular moviegoers who would rather just sit and watch something filled with action, but also a delight for fans who love to talk about the idea of the film even after the movie is ended and the credits have rolled. And that's exactly just for me. The film also establishes rules that the director has set up and the movie has to follow, and in this film there are very intriguing to say the least. We'll get into that later. So next point is how Christopher Nolan tried not to rely on special effects, and he actually shot the scenes the old-fashioned way, just with regular cameras. Example, the plane crashing into the building and the closing battle scene at the end of the movie when the building exploded. You would think that he used special effects for that, but he went the old-fashioned way. He actually bought an old plane and drove it into a building. And I mean, kudos to him, because it's technically really cheaper that he thought of doing that, because there's old planes. But the whole idea of just using special effects in his previous movies and everything, now a lot of directors just rely on that to make the movie shine a little more. But I really like the attitude that he took towards this movie, that he kind of kept the special effects really low. My next point is the cast that he reuses in most of his films. For example, we have Kenneth Branagh, the bad guy who plays Sator, or most notably Michael Caine as Crosby, who has been in Inception, Dark Knight Trilogy, The Prestige, Dunkirk, Interstellar. I mean, those are all the movies that have been directed by Christopher Nolan. I believe that Michael Caine has been in half of the Christopher Nolan movies, but not only does he work with the same actors that he's used before in other movies, but he also uses the same stuntman and even behind the scenes crew members and other departments in the film. Except for this time, under music, he couldn't get Hans Zimmer due to him already working on another project, which is a bummer. Next point, I loved how he tried to hold our hands through the movie in the way that he used the red and blue colors, allowing us to differentiate between forward time and reverse time, or as they called it in the movie, inverted. And his rule of, if you want to go back X amount of days, you need to spend X amount of days living in the inverted version. So there is no shortcuts, and I liked how he implemented that rule. And now let's go on to my cons. The story, even though I grasped the idea, I felt that some people would feel that it went too fast, and that's why I would say that it's a con. Maybe he could have shown the main character being trained and understand the idea of the inverted versus the regular time, and this way the audience could have learned it alongside the main protagonist. Yes, it would have been a little bit dull for the rest who kind of understood where he was going with the concept, but this covers his bases and allows audience to kind of really grasp the idea if they didn't understand it the first time. Also, he could have touched upon how the radios worked when they were communicating from the past to the present. Example, in The Final Stand, how they used the radio to talk from the actual battle to the guy that was waiting for Kate on the boat. We needed to establish that rule before that they could communicate using telephones, or in a different way if it was a different type of machine. Also, the idea of the main character needing to keep protecting Kate even after her husband had died, or even explain the twist at the end. The main protagonist discovered that he actually recruited Neo in the future. At least that would explain a little bit of the twist at the end. Also, the last point I'm going to make is a personal one under my con. I really wanted Hans Zimmer to make the music for this film, because he's done it for other Christopher Nolan movies. Can you imagine how this film would have been escalated to a different level if that would have happened? I still want to see this movie with Hans' touch. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my friend Touly and see how he saw this movie and what grade he gave the movie.
So I'm normally a fan of Christopher Nolan's work. I loved his Dark Knight trilogy. Sal mentioned Interstellar. I'm a big fan of Inception. And I suppose Tenet here reminded me a lot about Inception and how Christopher Nolan tries to portray these concepts that are far-fetched in reality, more on the theoretical side, but trying to to make them invigorating, interesting through these sort of scenes that he presents these concepts in. Of course, in the movie Inception, he deals with the idea of the dream world and diving deeper and deeper into these dream world and how you do so. Even though as far-fetched as those concepts were presented in that film, I, for one, thought that the way he presented it felt easier to get behind that versus how I felt about Tenet here, with how he dealt with this concept of, in general, I would just put it as time travel. I think for me, he tried to do too much in this film in terms of the concepts. I think the thing that kind of lost me was when one of the characters, I forget who, told the protagonist that in the inverted world, things that are supposed to be like normal to him are gonna feel weird, like in this sort of opposite trend. My first reaction to that, based on where you're supposed to feel heat, you feel ice instead, stuff like that. Thing that you could kind of wrap your head around because it feels very superficial. Okay, I could go along with that. But then the more I thought about it though, I was like, well, if you're gonna go that route and dress up your inverted world in such a fashion, then I have to start considering all of these other concepts that are out there that exist in the real world and imagine them in this sort of inverted or this opposite way. The more I thought about it, it just made the movie less realistic, even though it takes place in a fictional universe that is of Christopher Nolan's work. I think it was then that I kind of lost interest in the film. As Sal sort of alluded to, and I would appreciate it at least if they have gone about the movie this way, is to ease us into the film. Sure, we saw scenes, right? The encounter that the protagonist had with himself in that trippy sort of scene where they were struggling against one another. It reminded me of that scene in The Inception revolving around Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character where he was fighting against one of the bad guys within the dream in the hallway of the hotel. And again, it had that sort of weird feel to it where, they were trying to fight against gravity and it didn't feel right, but at the same time, it was cool. So I sort of had the same feeling here in Tenet in that scene. And of course, in other scenes that sort of had this inverted concept into it. But again, I would have liked it if they eased us into this concept of our protagonist entering this other side of reality. Sort of like in Inception, where they took the time to ease the audience into the concept of the dream world through Elliot Page's character. That would have been nice because, like I said, Christopher Nolan's concepts, the way he handled these, he goes a bit deeper, I feel like, and in order for us to dive as deep as he wants us to go into his concepts, he needs to establish them pretty firmly because, again, it's just really out there. For movies like these, I wouldn't take it as a pawn or anything if I need to be handheld in order to follow along. It's when you don't do it and I'm left with this feeling of, wait, it doesn't feel right because I don't think you've established enough of your foundation for me to get alongside what it is you're trying to do here. I feel like his approach to what he wanted to do in Inception was way more established in terms of the foundation of the ideas versus here in Tenet. Tenet to me felt more action oriented and just us following the protagonist around, doing stuff that we would expect of a protagonist, not just being the good guy. I, for one, again, based on the trajectory of the characters and how they were being developed, I actually cared more about the bond between the protagonist and Neo versus the protagonist wanting to do what he can to save Kate, who of course was the wife of the antagonist of the film. And because of that, I would have liked it more if the movie just revolved more between those two characters, because when Neo came out and told him later at the end of the film that, where he's currently at in the trajectory of the timeline, the real world versus the inverted world, he was approaching his end as they were converting there, but the protagonist's timeline, he was still moving towards the beginning of their friendship. So I found that way more interesting because it tied into Christopher Nolan's concept of time travel versus Kate, her character, just being there as like a motivator for our protagonist to just, go beyond the idea of, oh, let's stop these bad things from happening. He's just this love interest. Like, she either wasn't there as a character, or if they just played her character to like a different tone as not being a love interest, then yeah, she would have been there just as a supporting cast. But for me, I was more interested, again, in the bond between the protagonist and Neo. And I guess one of the last things I would say about the movie is some of the transitions in this film, it felt very, very choppy. It's like you'll see our protagonist here in one scene and suddenly he's already there at the next scene. There's this lack of transition that I like in films that gives me the sense of time passing by, or giving me the sense of believability that other stuff are happening while our protagonist is doing stuff. But I think it's a good and bad thing here. Like I said earlier too, like this film is one that just focuses a lot around our protagonist, our main character. And I guess some ways that they could have dealt with this is to just have more scenes on Neil, because again, I appreciate the relationship between these two characters, the dynamic between them. So they were to like focus a little bit more on the other characters, so that when they switch back to the protagonist, I would feel like enough time had gone by for me to believe that he have moved from one place to another. But it happened too much for my taste. Like he just suddenly popped up in the next scene. Oh, and there he is now in the next scene. So yeah, the transition was kind of rough in this movie. But again, in terms of like concepts and stuff, you know, it's to be expected of Christopher Nolan. He has done stuff like this before in other movies, and he's normally pretty good at, you know, trying to be out there with these concepts and put his own 2 cents, what have you, into these ideas. But at the end of the day though, I think this film left a lot for me to be desired still. If he had not just tried to do too much and just maybe done away with this inverted concept, even the movie itself wouldn't have been unique in the sense of, oh, you know, it's time travel, right? But, you know, Christopher Nolan in general, it's a good storyteller, so I would still appreciate that. But here, like, I think the ideas that he's trying to infuse into the story, the inverted world, I think for me, it just felt too far out there with the lack of him establishing the foundation for his audience. And to me, it really took away from me just appreciating what I was seeing on the screen and focus less on, you know, things are going to feel opposite in the inverted world. I have to start accepting these other ideas in which you're not even going to touch upon. And then that got in the way of me just enjoying what I see on the screen. If he has simplified some of his ideas here, then I feel like he could have gone away with it. I would have just accepted it and enjoyed for what it is, instead of trying to really not focus on what made sense and what didn't make sense. So my score in the end for this film is going to be a 6 out of 10. I personally wouldn't go back and rewatch it like I would rewatch a lot of Christopher Nolan's prior films. It was a good first watch, but I think, you know, for films like these, I would prefer to watch like Inception or something like that. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for me.
Okay, so I see your points, and I do agree on some of them. Like, for example, he could have shown us more of the rules, like you said, the heat versus cold in one world and the other. I would appreciate that if he kind of established it and dumbed it down for us a bit. My other point is that he could have done something at the end to make us understand why the protagonist was still protecting Kate. Like you said, I was more interested between the friendship of the protagonist and Neil. That to me was stronger, like you said, than the love interest. I think it could have been fixed with, they could have gone the Fifth Element route where she was the key to something, and the protagonist found out about it, that she was the key, and to protect her would have kept the world safe. So I think it's a good idea, but the concept was not executed well. The action is there, so people who love action movies, for example, James Bond movies, espionage and stuff like that, would like this movie, but just don't linger too much on the concept. For me personally, I would go rewatch it just to see what I missed and what other errors they committed. But I really like the idea that he built this out of nothing, and it somehow brings you in as a mystery and you try to unfold it, but it doesn't really explain everything. So there's a few cons there. So my final grade for this movie is going to be a little higher than Touly's. Is going to be a 7 out of 10. Watch it one time. If you liked it, you liked it. If you didn't, you didn't. But I don't know if it would be, like Touly said, worth rewatching again. For me personally, I am, just to nitpick a little more. So I guess that does it for this review of Tenet. Please join us next time where we're going to review News of the World.
Bird.
Bird.
Yeah, it's good.
Guto.
Guto?
Guto.
Bird is guto?
Guto.
Guto.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.